Hey, and welcome back to another Learning Java 2D Game Programming video. So in our last video, we made ourselves a little Minimap UI component so that we can move around our little map and see what it looks like. However, it was quite long and I was quite I guess I chopped it off at the end. So there are some bugs, or rather, it wasn't entirely finished. So we're going to finish it up. The reason why it looks good now is because we have a perfectly square map. If we make the map smaller, you can see that it will draw it correctly. But we also, of course, need to add the offset to this view bounds, as well as when we click inside it. And you're going to see why in just a minute. And after we've done that, we are going to start placing tiles. So I just made this very, very simple green tile with a little bit of noise. It's so subtle, it probably needs to be a little larger. But we're gonna use it just to test placing tiles with. But let's fix this first. And I'm also gonna get rid of this render settings text. It doesn't help any. All right, so the first thing that we are going to do, actually, let's just fix this thing first, because I only want to do that. Take that away. See what it looks like. Looks better, right? I don't want it to center its children. All right, I think this looks a little better. This is offset a little bit. That's because of the padding of this checkbox component. I'm not sure I want that padding or not. Let's just leave it for now. So in order to see what I was talking about, let's go into our editor state. And here where we set the width, let's set it to something else. Let's halve it. All right, now you can see what I mean. So this is what I want. I want it to draw the map inside here. But as you can see, this now doesn't correspond. We need to add this offset to this view box as well. So right now it would start over here and go into here somewhere. Also, when we click it, we also need to add that offset. So let's fix that. I'm just gonna cross these out for now, and we need to find our minimap component. So here we go, pixels per grid. Let's move this out of the generate map method and into the calculate ratio method. And instead of making this local, let's save it up here. I'm gonna say private int, what did we call it? Pixels per grid. Let's also make, I'm gonna have a position called offset pixel offset, maybe. And we don't need to do anything there because we will immediately calculate that inside of here. So let's say pixel offset is a new position, and then what offset is it that we want? So we have the offset here, right? This should be the offset. All right, so we're getting the width of our minimap component. We are taking away half of what is missing, right? So now we can change this to pixel offset. I'm gonna say int x, pixel offset, int y. Let's start by checking that this still works. It still draws it correctly, which it should, and it does, so that's great. Now let's add this pixel offset to this here. So let's see, is that something we add afterwards maybe? So pixel offset int x, and then plus pixel offset int y. Let's see if it draws our viewing box correctly now. And it does, but now when you click it, it looks really weird because we're not adding or subtracting the offset from when we click. So let's find that on drag. So here we say mouse position subtract absolute position, but let's also subtract, let's see, is it the offset or do we rather want, no, because here we're dealing with real, sorry. So, all right, so I guess it was. Well, awesome. So that worked for us. All right. Having this done, having this done, let's move on to what we want to do. All right, so I want to be able to place this tile, and currently it's inside of the tiles. So next to the wood floor, I put this called grass. Okay, and I wanna connect this to my button by using like a mouse button action. So what I'm gonna do for the input, I'm gonna create a new package inside of the input. I'm gonna say mouse, and in here I'm gonna create a class called MouseHandler. So we've started handling some mouse stuff inside of our state. We have handle mouse input. Currently it only contains this, and so that's fine. But we are going to be expanding on this a lot today. So I want to move all of the mouse handling into this. Maybe we can even just call it a mouse handler so it isn't as long as well. All right, so thinking. First of all, let's move this. Let's create one for us. I don't know, somewhere around where we create everything else. So a mouse handler. I'm gonna call it. So I'm gonna explain a little bit more, maybe why I'm doing what I'm doing. So currently, all of our UI components are listening to our mouse input, and they're all doing that by themselves. So if we would have two UI components on top of each other, then both of them would be listening to the mouse events on drag, on click, all of that. And that's probably not what we want. Also, when we start doing stuff on the game map here, what if I were to move this and both the UI component listened, but the game map also listens to my mouse event? So that would mean that we would be placing tiles behind here as we drag this, and we don't want that to happen. So we only want one mouse action, or MouseConsumer maybe, to be available at a time. So we're going to make an interface called a MouseConsumer, and it's going to have the methods that we currently have inside of our click actions. But that means that either a UI component can be the active consumer of the mouse events, or the game map can be the active consumer of the mouse events, or the click action that we have is the consumer, but only one will consume the events at a time. All right. Now maybe you understand more why I'm choosing to do the things that I do. So first of all, let's just initialize this. Currently it has nothing, but All right, and we are definitely going to want an update method in here. And currently, whoops, sorry, we want to do, I'm actually gonna, for ease, because we're gonna use this later, I'm just gonna take out the input from the state during the update. And then I'm gonna do what we did before, clear mouse click. All right, so now I feel like we don't need to wrap the handle mouse input inside of here. This will just be exchanged with the mouse handler update this. Okay, now all of our mouse logic can go into this class instead. So like I said, I want to have an interface called a MouseConsumer. So currently, it's only going to contain on click and this state, I believe, and on drag. All right. So the things that we're going to do now is let's start by going to our mouse handler. We're going to have a MouseConsumer, which is the active consumer. And we need a way to set the active consumer. So actually, let's do this, handle active consumer, and then let's pass in the state and maybe the input. So let's create that method. So if active consumer isn't null, so we have an active consumer. If input is mouse clicked, then active consumer on click, and then pass in the state. Else if input is mouse pressed, active consumer on drag state. All right, that should be fine. Let's make a getter and setter, alt insert. Great. And now we want our UI clickables to actually implement this interface. So this will still extend UIComponent, but now it will also implement MouseConsumer. And these already have these on drag, on click with the state, but it is complaining because this is protected and it needs to have the same level of accessibility. So in an interface, they're always going to be public. So it can't be lower than that. These need to be public. But we don't need to keep them in here because we've already declared them. The only problem is now we need to go into every class that implements it and say public instead of protected. And there we go. So what we're going to do now is we're not actually going to let the components listen on their own anymore. Our mouse handler is the only thing that's going to listen for the clicks and the presses, and then it's going to tell them the component or the active consumer that we are clicking. However, they can, of course, let themselves know if they have focus or not. So we're going to do this for now. However, we of course need to set, let's just say if we have focus, then do state set, or maybe we can just do get mouse handler set active consumer this. And we need to make a getter. Go into your state class and make a getter for the MouseHandler. There we go. Let's see if this works or if we missed something. So as it seems, this is still working, and this actually comes with, yeah, see here, I don't want this component to take over the active consumer, but we can actually fix that. So when we go into the MouseHandler and we set the active consumer, let's only do that if the active consumer is null. But that means we need to set it to null at some point. And that is, let's see, let's actually extract this, refactor, and say extract method, and I'm gonna say cleanup. And inside of this cleanup, let's also see input is mouse pressed, and actually I wanted to say if it isn't pressed anymore, so we've released it, then we want the active consumer to be null. So we're clearing the active consumer. That means that the consumer, that first, right. So, all right, there's just a little bug down here. Let's see. First of all, let's rename the input to just MouseConsumer, because that made this very easy to spot. This should of course be this.activeConsumer. Or now that they have different names, it can just be active consumer. There we go. Let's try that. And it seems as though it is working, and we only have one consumer, and that's awesome. Now we could draw this a lot outside. Actually, let's check this with our sliding components. So now you don't have to be on it. As long as you clicked it when you started, you can go on doing stuff. But now, look at this. So when we, inside of the UI slider, let's just go into here. We're just getting the value at wherever we're clicking. And before, that was not an issue since the component was listening on its own and the component size ends at its max value, then we could have never clicked outside anyway. But now we can, which means we need to keep track of this. We need to clamp it. Let's just clamp it. So let's say math.min, whatever is smallest between the max and this dot value, and whatever is largest of the minimum value or the value that we have. So that should clamp it just fine. All right, now you can't go outside in any direction. Awesome, just a quick little fix. All right, so in the interest of time, I am breaking this up into 2 separate videos. So for this video, we will have done the MouseHandler and then the MouseConsumer refactor. So this will make it easier for us to, oh right, this, let's fix this. Because right now, it just says, even though we've moved outside, until we release this button, it's going to have this component be its active component. And when we release it, it's going to say on click. It doesn't matter that we've gone outside. So the question is, the question is, how do we fix it? One way could of course be to add into this interface if you have focus, and then only do the on-click if you have focus currently. The only problem is, what does that mean for the game map in the next video? We also have these UI clickable. but that isn't gonna help us now that we call on click from the outside. So I feel like let's do it inside here right now. I mean, these components know if they have focus or not, so I'm gonna do that inside of the button and inside of the checkbox if has focus. So it's gonna always call the on click, but these components say that if we don't currently have focus, we're not gonna run our click. So that seemed to be working. All right, so for the next video, we are going to be placing our new grass tiles. And that mouse action is going to be a MouseConsumer. So until then, hej då!